busy week, not only with the Fred Smith Leadership Symposium, but Founders Day, and trustee meetings, and things like that. It just finished Easter, so there's a lot going on. I appreciate the effort. I got a call, I don't know, maybe 16, 17 months ago from Ron Foster. Ron will call me, I don't know, 2 or 3 times a year, maybe 4 times a year, and just to check on me, see how I'm doing, how are things at the college, just had you on my mind this morning, wanted to see how you're doing. And I always appreciate it, it's so thoughtful. And some of those times, he's got a brilliant idea. Bill, I just don't know what to make of this, but there's a lady, Brenda Smith, I've had her on my mind today, got you on my mind, maybe you should give her a call sometime. And so, he said this, and I said, well, tell me a little bit about her. He talked about Brenda and the breakfast with Fred and where she lived. And I said, well, you know what, the interesting thing is I'm going to be in the Dallas area in the next couple of weeks. I can do better than call her. I'll just go see her. So I called Brenda, and we connected, and we met at a Starbucks about 16 months ago there somewhere in the Dallas area on my way to somewhere else, and we got directions, and she knew exactly which exit and so forth. So we're there in a crowded Starbucks kind of looking for each other and found each other somehow. And I think it was the glow on her face. You'll love the glow on this lady's face when you meet her today, but she's absolutely precious. Elise and I were there and just had a delightful conversation, and we left thinking there's something here, that there's been some connection that's been made, and we're thankful to Ron Glosser for making that connection. Ron talks about he's writing a book on the genealogy of friendship. And this is just another example of somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody, and he's like the Newton connector. You know, we're in the Newton connector here. Well, Ron is also a connector. He connects people, and met John Begley many, many years ago. This is a friendship that goes back decades, and he's had an interest and fell in love with Lindsey Wilson College through John Begley. And so we're grateful to Doc and for Ron and for Brenda for being here. So would you all please give Lindsey Wilson College welcome to my dear friends, Ron Glosser and Brenda Smith.
Well, Dr. Lucky, don't sit down too comfortably. I have something for you.
Okay.
It's for you all and your committee and Lindsey Wilson. On behalf of the Breakfast with Fred Leadership Institute and Vita, we want to thank you for being our co-laborers in Christ. It has been a wonderful 16 months, and many thanks to Denise Fudge and to Amy Thompson and the committee, Dr. Begley. They have worked so hard to make this happen. And thank you to Lindsey Wilson.
Thank you so much. It means so much to us.
Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you all? So there's some badness in this crowd. Oh, it's so good to be here. Ron and I are just going to talk a little bit this morning. We're going to have a conversation. I'm going to kick it off, and then I'm going to throw it over to my good friend, Ron Glosser. I love this because Ron is a legacy friend of mine. He was a dear friend of my dad's, and Dad sort of gave him to me, which is just a wonderful gift. Dad was a leader. He was known for his Christ-centered, principle-based thinking. In fact, many people saw him as a mentor to a generation of leaders. He was a most unusual man. Grew up in poverty, grew up without a college education, and yet he understood early on how God had designed him. As a teenager, he was given a verse by the traveling evangelist, and he paraphrased this verse as Proverbs 18:16. Take the gift that God has given you and use it, and you will stand before great men. And I take the privilege of adding, and women. And then, as he considered what that meant to take that gift, he considered what what his uniqueness was. And that was always his challenge to people. Find your uniqueness. And as he would work with people, he was a business executive. He served on a lot of Christian boards. But he spent a lot of time just listening and talking with people. And when they say, well, how do I know what my uniqueness is? He would say, what do you think about a lot? What do you do well? What do other people tell you that you do well? What do you read about? What do you spend time doing? You'll find your uniqueness if you answer those questions. When he was 28, he sat in a cemetery in Nashville, Tennessee, and he looked around at all the tombstones. And you would have had to know my dad to really appreciate this, but he thought, what do I want my epitaph to be? He came up with 3 words. He stretched others. And he spent his life really using that as his mission, to stretch others. So as we have developed Breakfast with Brenda Leadership Institute, we've added a little bit to that, but our mission is to stretch and bless the next generation of leaders. And that's what we're called to do. And that's why we're so thankful to be in Lindsey today and to be in Columbia. And I'm glad to be here where it's not raining. But I thought, wouldn't it be fun this morning just to hear Ron talk about how Dad stretched him and how they came to know each other, and to tell about the interesting circle of connections. You were right, this man is a connector. And just show you how those lines and those circles intersect. So, Mr. Losser, how did Fred stretch you?
Oh, he stretched me in so many ways that I could literally speak for the next hour. You'll be glad to know I'm not going to do that. But first of all, I need to say, Bill, how grateful we are that you have given us the opportunity to come and be with you and your faculty and staff and students and so forth. This is a priceless privilege, and we're really grateful for it. I want to just add a word or two before I get into answering your question. This whole genealogy thing really intrigues me. And John and I were talking earlier. My whole experience and the reason for being here this morning starts about 25 years ago, when a wonderful man by the name of Larry Apley said there is a very special school down in Columbia, Kentucky. And I want you to go down there and experience it firsthand. And so I did that. And I have to tell you, my life has never been quite the same since. I was commenting to Bill yesterday, it was just 20 years ago yesterday that I had the wonderful privilege of being here for your Founders Day. And then 3 years later, John got a little carried away and actually conferred an honorary degree on me. And I really appreciate that. I had a chance to speak at commencement. A long answer of saying that Larry Apley then comes into play, Brenda, because of this. Because the Lawrence A. Apley Award for Leadership was given to your father.
That's right.
So you see how God works? But the wonderful lesson, I guess, for me in that was that, and I want to talk just a bit about it, maybe the greatest lesson I've learned from your dad is how to be a river of blessings. When God comes alongside us, you know, it's just not for our own enjoyment. He always has an additional message for us. And he wants us to do something with that creative idea. And so I've taken just great joy over the years in that. And tied to that, obviously, is not only recognizing that we have blessings, but how important it is to express gratitude. I'm confident that God wants to hear from us. And he wants us to know just how grateful we are from the smallest to the greatest things that are happening in our lives. But your dad did that for me in a very special way. That was one way that he helped me. And I could go on, but let's talk about some other things for a moment.
One of the things that Dad said was, never lose the good of a bad situation. And I was recently talking to the president of LaTourneau University, and we were discussing that. And he said, our students need to hear that. Our faculty needs to hear that. Often, business people come to campus and all they talk about are their successes. And it's awfully helpful to know that we have bad situations, but there's good that comes from them. Rod, have you ever had a bad situation?
I've had so many I can't recall them all this morning. No, I've had some bad situations. You know, many times people look at me and they say, boy, it seems as though you've always been on the King's Highway and all the lights are green. Now, I admit that I'm on the King's Highway. There's no question about that. And most of the time, the lights are green. But every so often, you know, I have a yellow light that sort of slows me down a bit and says, you know, you really need to think a little more about this before you jump. And then there are other times that I get a red light and I have to stop. And I've had a number of those, and several of them involve your dad. You know, I had the wonderful privilege of being in Hershey, Pennsylvania. You know, heading up the Hershey Trust and Foundation for a number of years. And it was like, I was like a kid in a candy store. There's no question about that. You know, my first 6 months there, I put on 25 pounds. And I realized one day, you know, I've either got to bring this under control or I'm going to kill myself. But it was so tempting. I had my office in Mr. Hershey's home, and one of the perks that went with that job was a gigantic crystal bowl that was filled with every Hershey product. And I felt it my duty several times a day, you know, to sample the latest offerings. But there came a time, and there were a lot of circumstances that led up to this, where I finally felt that it was time to move on. And the person who helped me more than any during that time was your dad. And it came about in a unique way. Many years prior to that, while I was living in Akron, Ohio, I became deeply involved in a labor management prayer breakfast. And so when I went to Hershey, I got a call one day from a friend of mine back in Akron. And he said, we've just had the most amazing experience here. And there's this guy from Dallas, Texas, by the name of Fred Smith, and you really need to know this guy. And he's written this book, you know, You and Your Network. Long and short, I get on the phone, as Bill has already said, I like to phone people. I got on the phone and I called Fred and I said, introduce myself. My name didn't mean anything to him. And I said, I'm up here in Hershey, Pennsylvania, and I'd love for you to come and speak, I said, for our prayer breakfast. It was the 100th anniversary of the founding of Hershey, so it was a very special time. And so he came, and interestingly enough, it was within 6 months of that I decided to leave Hershey. And I've often asked myself the question, I wonder what I would have done had I not had such wise counsel at precisely the right time. And so I valued that. So yeah, I've had some tough times, and there have been other times. One time, for example, with the merger of a bank I was involved in, I found myself, you know, ending up in the second spot rather than the top spot. But I learned a lot from that experience as well, that perhaps it's more important to be a good follower